Previously on agentpalmer.com, Copeland's City of Glass is the world's best travel guide. Braff's Garden State is much more than most give it credit for. And to be sure, Ethan has massive charisma and wisdom modifiers because I'm still thinking about things he said in that last episode. This is the Palmer Files, episode 45 with Chris Webster, founder of DIGTECH, co-founder of the Archaeology Podcast Network, and a podcaster in his own right. He's here to discuss cultural resources management, which is another name for archaeology, the Indiana Jones myth, being a business owner, digital and physical stuff, and so much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show! Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 45th episode is Chris Webster, an archaeological entrepreneur who founded DIGTECH, which is digital technologies and archaeological consulting, co-founder of the Archaeology Podcast Network, as well as being an actual archaeologist, podcast engineer, and for good measure, pilot. What you are about to hear is part education, as I learn exactly what an archaeologist does in regards to cultural resource management, and part discussion about stuff and its importance or relevance, both digitally and physically, like physically the things you have, or the things you keep. Plus, I genuinely enjoy getting to know the other half of the Archaeology Podcast Network founders. So, when you put this together with episode 5, featuring the other co-founder, Tristan, you get the full picture of who is in charge and how much they know and how much passion they have. Before we get going, remember that if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest, Chris Webster, at ArcheoWebby, that's ArcheoWebby, DIGTECH, his company, at DIGTECH LLC, and the Archaeology Podcast Network at ArchPodNet. This show can be tweeted at the Palmer Files. You can get all of Chris's particulars at digtech-llc.com or propodcastnow.com or archpodnet.com. The man has all the websites, all of which will lead you to Chris or Chris-adjacent things. My writings and rantings and other adjacent things to me can be found on agentpalmer.com, and email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's dig in. Chris, your company, DIGTECH, has the tagline, "The future of the past." And I have to tell you that it makes me think of a fictional company that ended up doing bad with a tagline of "We make the future," which was INGEN from the Jurassic Park series. Now, "We make the future" was the book, nice. The novel tagline. I think "We make your future" there were distinctions, right? But every time I see your company come across my feed, I think of INGEN. Are you evil? Like,
I don't think it's up for the company to say whether or not they're evil. I think it's up for society to say whether or not you're evil. And so far, nobody has told us or told me in particular that I'm evil. So I'm going to go ahead and say no, not yet.
Okay. I mean, look, it's I don't know. The future of the past seems very INGEN to me. I think, for me, you will always be tied in with that franchise now. I'm sorry.
Well, and I can understand that. But I think they really were looking at the future, but we're more concerned with the analytics of the past from a futuristic perspective, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I like that, your company, you've got 5 things on your homepage, and I only bring it up because I love how succinct they all are, because a lot of companies are not. And As a guy who's been looking for a job for way too long, I tend to dive in like, what is this company's website really telling me? And learn, do, teach, create, and make. It's as direct as you could possibly be. And I know there's an evolution to it, but when you started, were these all the things you wanted to do?
Oh, no. When I started, it was just for CRM archaeology. I mean, I always had the idea of doing more things, and they were all things related somewhat to archaeology for the most part, but it was different aspects of that, right? So, I mean, I started the company first, and then I started my blog that was based around, doing archaeology and things like that. So that went on there because you need a place to host it, and it seemed appropriate. Started the podcasts, and then that went in there. And the APN used to actually be hosted right on that website. And so, well, my first podcast used to be hosted on that website until we kind of got too big for that. Then we put them on their own website. Now it's just linked through there. And then there's just always been other things that I've been interested in that space because, from day one, I always thought that, you can teach a monkey to walk transects in a field. And sometimes there are monkeys just walking transects in a field, but you can teach just about anybody to do that. But when it comes down to the wider and the bigger picture in training and science communication and all the things, I always knew that's kind of where I wanted to go. So the website didn't start that way, but it ended up that way, trying to emphasize not the things that I'm doing, but the concepts I'm more interested in.
Like, were these concepts with you always? I mean, obviously everybody takes a journey, but like, you, when you first think about history, did you think about communicating history?
I mean, probably not, right? I think I didn't really come to the communication aspect of it through training, blogs, podcasts, whatever the case may be, probably until, honestly, it was my first job, my first CRM job. And I was like, so what's this? So what's that? I'm so green. I'm just like asking all these questions, right? I've never been one to shy away from asking questions.
Well, hold on. Speaking of questions, a CRM job, for those who do not know, because I hear CRM and I go, well, like customer relations, resource management, or whatever. Like,
right.
So, are you talking about something different?
So CRM actually has three meanings to me. There's customer relations or resource management, depending on who you're talking to. I'm also a pilot, so it also means crew or cockpit resource management. And then, but in the context of archaeology, it means cultural resource management. Really, it means cultural resources management. I think that middle word is pluralized.
Is it still a database, just like we'll take the pilot one out for now, but is it still a database, just like the other one?
No, it's not. It's the whole act of managing cultural resources, archaeological sites in the United States. It's surveying and identification, it's preservation, it's science communication, it's all the things related to the history of the people that have lived on this continent, right? From the historic to the prehistoric past. Cultural resources management is the industry that's set up to identify, preserve, and document archaeological sites. Basically, that's what CRM archaeology is in the United States. It's also called CRM in a lot of other states, but sometimes the letters are different because of language and stuff.
All right. So you have your first job.
So that's it. Yeah, I've got my first job, and I'm asking around. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what that is. You learn stuff in school. It's mostly theory, and then I went to. Most archaeologists go to a field school of some type, which basically is like a 4 to 6 week long program over the summer that is it's usually intended to teach them something about archaeology, something, about all the different little facets of archaeology and different, testing techniques and digging and artifact identification, stuff like that. There's various qualities to field schools and what they'll teach you, but that's kind of the idea. The real answer is they don't teach you everything, right? And you don't learn everything that you learn they teach you anyway. So when you get to your first job, even your first few jobs, you're like, okay, I vaguely remember that, but you're going to have to explain that again. And I started, I wasn't getting some of the answers that I wanted because, sometimes the people I was working with, either they didn't know where the origin of something, or, they just weren't good teachers, to be honest. And I was thinking, why isn't there a book about this? Why isn't there a rough guide to shovelbums? Shovelbums is the colloquial term for people who do archaeology around the country on a job-to-job basis. And it's like, why isn't there a rough guide to that? In fact, one of my first things, a year into being an archaeologist, I actually contacted the Rough Guide series of books and says, I think there should be a book about this. And they said to send over a table of contents and a sample chapter, which I wrote up. And they said, it's too niche of a topic. I don't think we can do this. And I'm like, you literally have a rough guide to opera. Like, how many people are buying that? But anyway,
I mean,
that would never happen.
I think it could. Is it an industry thing? Like, I go back, episode 5 of this podcast, I had Tristan on, and we obviously we talked a lot about a lot of things, but it feels to me that when you take apart the industry as a whole and you remove the I want to be Indiana Jones people, you end up with an industry that's not understood. So there's of everything you're doing, I feel like the biggest hurdle, and I think I said this with Tristan, and the biggest opportunity you have with the podcast network is reaching people like me. Or maybe not me, like I appreciate history and I read those books. So I'm not like, what's tomorrow? Like I do turn around. But on a whole, most people think you're Indiana Jones. And I don't mean general, but on a whole, that's everybody. Yeah. So there's a problem because that's not what you do.
No, not necessarily. And not only do they think we're Indiana Jones, but they also think we're, what was his name? Him and his wife, the two paleontologists in Jurassic Park,
oh,
right?
Yeah.
Because they're always like, oh, you're an archaeologist, you're Indiana Jones. Have you found any dinosaurs? I'm like, those are 62 disciplines separated by 65 million years at least. So the answer is no. If you find dinosaurs in archaeology, you're probably digging either too deep or in the wrong spot. So yeah, that just makes you a bad archaeologist. But yeah, I mean, you're right. And people romanticize the job, and it's purely because of the Indiana Jones movies, I think, and also because of travel, right? People see that as a job filled with travel, and they're not wrong. Even if you have a salaried job with a company in one city, chances are you're traveling all over that state or region for the work that you're doing, right? You're not leaving your office to go 30 minutes away. I mean, some places that have a high density of like construction and things like San Diego and places like that, they need archaeological monitoring.
I just imagine you being like, I'm an archaeologist, this is my hole, there are others like it, but this is mine, and you just dig down for like ever. Like that's your job. This is your 10 by 10 foot square. Dig down until you hit molten core. Like what?
It's not really wrong. I mean, you're not too far off the base. We do have reasons to stop, but a lot of that's what separates like cultural resource management or CRM archaeology, like professional archaeology they call it, from academic archaeology. The ones people really think of when they think Indiana Jones. He was a college professor. They always think, anytime I tell somebody that I'm an archaeologist, usually one of the first questions is, what school do you work for? And when I tell them I don't work for a school, I'm independent, I own my own company, they're like, what does that even mean? I didn't even know that was a thing. And I'm like, yeah, you know that highway you drove here on? Archaeologists surveyed it before it was a highway. You know what I mean? So that's, and it wasn't an academic project unless it was done back in like the 70s or the 60s. But if it was done since the 80s, then, professional career archaeologists are the ones that did that. And not to say that academics aren't career archaeologists. It's just a different path. But the academics, more to your point, they will dig in one spot for 30 years. You know what I mean? I mean, they will find their thing that they did their thesis on when they were 25 or their PhD, and they will be there when they're 75 still writing about it. So that's
but there's got to be an amount of burnout with that, I would think, because I just yeah, sure. I mean, especially for academics where, every 4 years you've got a new class and there's turnover within, there's sophomores that are leaving and other juniors that are coming in. And, I get that, but to be that singular focused, and maybe it's because I can't focus on anything ever, but like to have that singular focus, is there... do people change their disciplines and like, hey, I like history, but okay, maybe not. And I'm going to go broad, right? But like, maybe not so much with the Romans.
Sure.
Like, I'm going to go to the Far East and learn. Like, do people change their disciplines, or like, no, you wrote your thesis, you kind of made your bed, now sleep in it?
You're definitely not locked in,
okay,
right? But for the most part, people do approach a study area for specific reasons, right? Maybe it was their passion since they were a child, or more often than not, they wanted to be an archaeologist. And when they finished their undergrad, if they went straight into like a PhD program, which a lot of academics will go, right into a PhD program, if they're advised properly, they will be asked, what are you interested in? Are you interested in Egyptology? Are you interested in, Near Eastern antiquities or China or something like that? Whatever you're interested in, you find the university that has people at that university that are doing that research. And then you try to get to that university for your PhD. If you do, you're going to learn under them. All your learning is going to be, focused around this one specific area. And typically there are many, many questions to be answered, right? It's not like you get bored of studying the Chinese. I mean, maybe you do, right? Or maybe you get bored of studying the Romans. But it's really, have you run out of questions? And usually the answer to that is no, we haven't run out of questions. There's lots of questions. So, and the thing is too, your opportunity to dig or survey or work in the field at these sites is usually in the context of the aforementioned field school, which might only be 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks if you're lucky. And during that amount of time, it's just a massive amount of data collection that will take you and your work study students or whoever the rest of the school year to analyze. And that may not even provide the answers to the question that sent you to that location in the first place, or what you were looking for. Or maybe it developed into 10 other questions, and now you've got to write those up, and that's different papers and research. And I mean, one site, or at least one discipline or one region or one focus, I mean, really could take an entire career, because there's a lot to know if you stay interested in it. If you don't stay interested in it, well, nobody's going to tell you can't switch, but it might be tough if you don't have the research history to back it up.
I mean, my experience in, okay, so it's definitely skewed, right? But I read Michener's The Source a long time ago, twice actually. And in it, he reverse chronologically tells the story of a tell, which, I guess for someone who doesn't know, it's like a city built upon a city built upon a city, and it ends up being a mound of dirt over time. And so having read that book and how it just, and it's been a long time, but I know there are massive jumps, right? Like when he's talking about the very bottom, it's like, let's say, use round numbers, so it's like 0. And then all of a sudden he's, it jumps to 500. It's like, well, 500 years went by. Like what the, but you're just digging down. It's, obviously that makes sense. So I understand that, but again, like I wander. So I go like, well, how do you, okay. I mean, maybe in relation to a tell, like I'm getting different histories. So now it's all about the region as opposed to, something else. Is that, I guess that's what's the difference, right? Because like, obviously I'm talking about, you can study the history of a region, but you can also study the history of a people. And if it's a people, they might move. So you're not necessarily in the same spot, right? Like people migrate.
Sure.
It's just, it's weird because we always like to think of history as static. I think that might be one of the big misconceptions, right? Like, yeah, people move around, but, how far?
Yeah.
Like, question mark, okay, like, that's where the house was. I'm done. Not, well, where were they before that? And where are they after? Which I feel like are standard CRM questions. Like, where were they before that house? Well, somebody had to build that house. And where were they after? Because they're not in it now.
Right. Well, and you've got to define they too, right? Like who is they? Is it one family that you're talking about, or is it their ancestors and their descendants? Is it the entire village? Obviously, in a lot of circumstances, I mean, people are moving around in that context, in that geological slice of time, quite frequently, right? Even if they stay in one place, in one village, and they have children after children after children, and they have children, and they have children, and they have children, and they're there for 100 years. 100 years is really difficult to define archaeologically, right? It's really difficult to define. We might have a couple instances where we know that this was a single time event, like a hearth or a fire pit or something like that. But that's pretty much it, right? Some of the other artifacts there, we might find a bunch of things, and if we can't prove that it was a single use event because of their association with each other in the landscape, I mean, you could be talking several hundred years with just a single, small unit with artifacts and features in it. So, or a few thousand years for that matter, if it's someplace that they went back to frequently. So it really just depends on where you're at in the world and how people use the landscape in those areas when you start talking about stuff like that. But then you can look at stuff like Roman cities, and sure, the city doesn't go anywhere. The city might have the city has structures that have been there for thousands of years at this point, right? There's Roman cities that still have things that are 2,000, 2,500 years old, still standing in those locations, but the people moved around. Can you track that? Can you track where the individuals went? In some cases, you can, because like people who are potters and other things like that, they signed their stuff a lot, so you can actually track if you track their signature and you find out where they're at. Like artists and things like that, you can find their things, but the common person, you probably can't. So, yeah, it's difficult.
As a person in the industry, right? How do you deal with I guess this is a personal question. Like, how do you personally deal with the fact that history changes? Because, and look, the layman, the everyman, is never going to pay attention to that kind of stuff, I think, for the most part. Like, I'm kind of, at least digitally, in your circle, so I understand that different things change perception, and the theory of 50 years ago about how this farmer in this particular part of the world, in this particular part of the area, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Like, it just changes, right? Like, this guy went this direction for water, and then we find something new, or a new thing comes out or whatever, and now it's like, well, he went that direction. We were wrong. Within the,
right.
For the average person, they're like, what does it matter what direction? And I understand it does. But, like, things are always fluid, right? Like, we can't go back and look at the film. So, everything you're taught, there's always the potential that everything you learned, and I'm not talking like how to dig, that's kind of like, but the stories, the facts can change. How do you, like, at any moment, like, somebody smart could come around and just change it. How do you deal with that?
I think you have to just be not so tied to your own conclusions, right? You have to be fluid and understand that this is a science, and new evidence means new conclusions in a lot of cases. But that gets real difficult, and it's one of the big problems of academia, right? CRM archaeologists, and we can talk about this in a minute, we don't often have these issues because of the way that our jobs are. We're always on some different place, working on some different thing, and we can't determine what that is. We go where the jobs are. We go where the law says, hey, something needs to be done here, goes out to bid, your company wins. Now you're digging here. I didn't choose to dig there. I didn't choose what the subject matter was. I'm just there now, right? But academics, they find a site, they have questions they want answered, they want to do a particular thing. They might be doing that for 30 years, and then some upstart grad student comes along and says, you know what? This has all been completely misinterpreted, and here's why, and I can prove it. And then this person's life work is now in question, not because of anything they did wrong, but just because of evidence or a new technique or a new scientific discovery or a new machine or something that does different analytics on what they've been saying has totally upended their whole theories. I wouldn't say that happens a lot, but it does happen for sure. And some people handle it better than others, to be honest. And academics don't handle it well because they base their entire career, their whole reputation on a thing. Yeah, like usually like one concept or one site or one area. And when that gets challenged, they usually don't give it up until they die. And then now now we can move on, So, but with CRM, that's what I'm saying. Like CRM is mandated federally and at the state level, right? So I get jobs, like I'm doing a job in June and July in northeastern Nevada. It's not my choice to necessarily work up there, but I've got a client who she's the environmental manager at a gold mine, and I've been working with them on small projects for the last 10 years. I'm basically their only contractor that they work with. And now they've got this huge thing, and now I'm working up there, and I've brought in 2 other firms to help out, and because it's just too big for me to handle on my own. And I didn't choose to do that, and I don't have any research questions that are pertinent to the area. Our job is to collect as much data as possible that's a minimum of 50 years old. Well, 40 years in this case because it's Forest Service land. A lot of times it's 50, but there's a minimum time frame that you look at: roads, mining features, prehistoric features that date back thousands of years. You're basically just cataloging and describing all the things that you find within a predetermined area that they want to work in, and you determine what its historical significance is based on what it is. Is it rare? Is it common? Is it something we need to have further study on? That kind of stuff. And then they make a decision on whether or not they're going to proceed into that area. If they are, you might have to actually dig some holes and go further, or they can avoid it and just not deal with it. But that's our job. Our job isn't necessarily to analyze things. I mean, we have research questions that are fundamental to the area, basic stuff, because we have to ask them, like, what was transportation like? What about migration? Who lived here? Those are natural questions you're going to answer just doing the field work.
But are you getting some of that?
But we don't
from
really
the
go
academics?
deeper than that. No, we're getting it from our own industry, right? We're getting it from years of these are basic research questions. There's always questions of, what kind of activities were happening here? Was it ranching if it's prehistoric? If it's historic, was it ranching? Was it immigration? Was it is it a trail people were walking on to get from one place to the next? Was it mining? All those kinds of things. If it's prehistoric, was it a habitation site? Did people live here? Was it a hunting site? What is all the other things that prehistoric peoples did in that area? You have to know something about the area and know something about, who you're talking about. If you don't know anything about the people in the area, which is rare these days, but if you don't know anything about them, then you ask the more generic questions. Who was here and what were they doing? And those are the questions you're trying to answer with your surveys and your discoveries. So you try your best.
As a CRM, how much time do you get? Like, do you get a month, a week?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the project, right? If the client has a predetermined time frame, like if it's a construction client, like for example, we've got a small phase of this project that they need to have bulldozers on the ground on some roads that we have to survey by the end of July, I think, which means we have a priority to start in June. We can't start until June because the whole area is covered in snow till at least the end of May. So otherwise we'd be starting in May. But we're going to start at the first or second week of June based on snow melt. And we have a priority to finish this one section so we can write it up so the Forest Service can read the report, do the comments. We have a chance to make revisions based on their recommendations. Then the client gets sign off. Then they can bring in their road graders and their bulldozers by the end of July, because it takes a good month and a half for that regulatory process to happen before they have permission to do that. And then all the other stuff we're doing is for work that they're going to do in 2022. So we got plenty of time to get all that signed off, get it finished. So the field work is often based on one of two things. It's based on either the client has a hard stop, right? We need this done by this date because that's just the way it is. If that's the case, if it's a short period of time, then you just hire more people, right? Like as a company owner, I'm going to choose to hire as few people as possible, because let's be honest, the fewer people you have, the fewer people that can get hurt. I like to employ people for longer periods of time, because archaeologists in this profession, they're working from job to job, and I'd rather not hire 40 people for a week. I'd rather hire 4 people for 10 weeks if I can, right? It's the same amount of money to me. I don't really care. But people would rather be employed longer. And if I have the ability to do that, then I'd rather do that, right? Because it's just better for the employees. But sometimes you just don't have that ability, right? Like this one, after this first priority, It's just we have to get it done before the end of the summer, which in that area is early October, right? Before it starts snowing again. So, the rest of it, I mean, we're probably going to take a month and a half to 2 months to do it because I'm only bringing on a couple people, and we're just going to work until we get it done, and that is what it is. So yeah, time frame dictated by multiple circumstances. No project is the same.
All right, so what about digital? And what I mean by that is what about digital archaeology? Like, I got rid of a server. I got rid of a hard drive. Like, I don't have to call you in, like, before I do that. I don't, let's say it's I get called in by a company to, I don't know, reformat some hard drives that they're getting rid of. Like, no one's being like, that data might be useful to us or something. Like, so it, is, or are we just or are there just going to be holes from like stuff that, pre-internet stuff that just never made it? Is that?
Well, first off, it's interesting you asking me about digital archaeology because my brain first went to using digital methods in archaeology because I one of my podcasts, the DIGTECH podcast, we talk about digital archaeology literally all the time. That's what that podcast is about, the intersection of technology and archaeology, because even in 2021, it's still a hard sell to get field archaeologists to even use tablets or smartphones in the field to record their data. And that's what most people think of as digital archaeology.
So we'll get back to my digital art, but so they're just going in with paper and pen. I'm like, cool, it's fine, but is that it's just paper and pen? And then you have to transcribe that to the report, so you're typing up your notes because obviously, you're not hand mailing. Here's my notes.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And there's so much room for error there, right? Like transcribing somebody's heat-stroked, scribble. I'm left-handed. Partly my reason for going down the digital road over 10 years ago. Nobody can read my handwriting, right? So I scribble, I scratch. It doesn't look good. I drag my hand across the paper, whether I'm using pen or pencil. It doesn't matter. I'm left-handed. It's all
and you're
garbage,
out
right?
in the heat.
So
you're sweaty a little bit. Smudges. Now, yeah. Okay.
I'm sweating. I'm covered in bug spray and sunscreen. I've got this paste on me, and I'm covered in dirt too. And it's windy. It's just a recipe for disaster when it comes to notes. And yet, still, archaeologists are hanging on, kicking and screaming to their Write in the Rain notebooks and their clipboards and their paper and their pencils, and it's total lunacy. But that's where we're at, even here in 2021. So yeah. Now to your question, that becomes really, really interesting because it comes down to a really difficult question to answer of what's worth saving, because we don't know what's worth saving until we need it.
All right, that's
right.
Fair.
Speaking archaeologically, my common example is always Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico. Huge area, lots of fantastic like old, like 1,000-year-old or a little like 1,400-year-old or so. Structures built by Native Americans in that area, right? And these military, I think there was a military branch they were exploring or surveying or something. They came by in the late 1800s, I think it was, or maybe early 1900s, and they just stopped by and said, "Wow, this place is super cool. Let's chill here for a bit." And along the walls on the inside of one of these structures, probably lots of the structures, you could see scorch and soot marks where the prehistoric people had a fire pit right there. So these guys are like, yeah, that does look like a great place for a fire. Let's build one. They didn't know anything about carbon-14 dating because it wasn't invented for another 70 years, right? But now, because they put fires there, we can no longer carbon date those hearths. We can't carbon date the soot on the walls. We can't do any of it because they destroyed it. But they didn't know they were destroying it. And that's why we collect so much information as archaeologists. We try to write down, photograph, sample as much as we can, because something might be invented in 20 years that we have no idea even exists, that we can then go back and apply to that. I mean, how many police cases have you seen, solved by DNA? They collected something that had DNA on it before they even know DNA was a thing that you could test, right? Before the human genome was sequenced. And all these cases are now being solved because we have the DNA evidence. And that's probably the best example of that. So when it comes down to your computer, it's like, before you hit the delete key, or before you put a drill through that hard drive, like, how do you know what's important? And I don't know, man. It comes down to space. If we could save everything, we probably should save everything, but we don't have a proper way to really index it and search it, and it just becomes a jumbled, cluttered mess. But that does lead into archaeogaming, which is something we can talk about. If you want. I've
been kind of slightly fascinated by archaeogaming, and yet staying away from it, because I don't want to get too. I feel like I have the potential to like dive into things. So there are times when I stay on the periphery on purpose. Like, we're recording this in the summer-ish, spring, right? And I'm a baseball fan, and I watch every one of my team's games. If my girlfriend wants to watch a movie, that's fine. I put the game on mute, just as like a old school picture-in-picture. It's just another device, just kind of near the TV, right? I'm that fanatic about it, and I did this a couple of years ago, and I really haven't missed a game since, for better or worse. I'm not gonna out myself right now, but like, they're not a good team. They haven't been for a long time. It's just, I enjoy baseball, and now I've become fanatic with it. So when you talk about archaeogaming, there's a part of me that's like, just stay away. Like, don't get too far in, because I'm also the guy who's got 7 more Len Dayton books, and then I've read all, 45 that he's wrote, and now I found other authors who I'm also, almost religiously reading through their bit. Thank God I never got into hard drugs. Like, seriously. But so archaeogaming, like, I know a little bit, and I know about, obviously when it comes to archaeogaming, everybody talks about one thing in particular, and that's E.T. The Atari game.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
because
the
that's the
games,
one that had the flashy documentary, and I think Ernest Cline shows up there.
But hold on,
with the DeLorean in the documentary, which is why it's the flashy documentary, right?
That wouldn't surprise me. I'm kind of surprised those haven't showed up. We're like, my wife and I are listening as we drive to Ready Player 2, and we're only about
I read that
2/3 of the way through it.
It's so. Look, honestly, one of the interesting things, as a side note, and maybe it's part of archaeogaming, Ready Player 1, Armada, which no one should sleep on Armada, because if you liked Ready Player 1 and you liked The Last Starfighter, Armada is the book for you. Period. Full stop. And then Ready Player 2, all of these books have an element of archaeogaming, because the pop culture references are historically accurate to a certain period of time. That it's like, if you were born after 1984, 5, 6, somewhere in there, some of these things you may remember if they had like a culturally lasting impression, maybe like a War Games type scenario where it kept staying on.
Sure.
But other than that, like, you need an older brother, or you need to be kind of looking backwards and fascinated by a certain period of pop culture. If you don't know it, you don't know it. You don't know the music, you don't know the movies, you don't know the television, and you're just lost.
There's so much in those books too. I mean, I was born in 75, so I was pretty impressionable in the 80s, and it's a lot even for me, right? Like, and I wasn't obsessed with it by any means. I just simply lived through it. And, I feel like I recognize most things, but the things I don't recognize, I wouldn't know anyway. So there you go. But it's fascinating with archaeogaming. There's really 2 aspects to archaeogaming, right? And the basic one is in the ET stuff for me, like the ET video games. And if you don't know what we're talking about, the Atari made an ET video game that was a huge flop, and they buried like 200,000 cartridges that didn't sell in the desert in Arizona. And then they dug them up a while back. And Andrew Reinhard is an gaming guy, archaeologist, who was actually in that documentary, and he wrote a book recently. I say recently, it was probably a couple years ago now, called Gaming. So if you're interested in this, go check it out. But Gaming has basically two different elements to it, two very different elements to it. One of them is about games and archaeology, and the other one is truly archaeology, I think. And the first one is representation of archaeology in video games, right? You take like the Assassin's Creed series, you take, the straight up Indiana Jones games and Lara Croft games and stuff like that. Anything that's actually based on or loosely based on archaeology, that's gaming. How is archaeology and history and culture represented in these storylines?
Real quick, because
how are people interacting?
Parse this for a moment, because the biggest game of the pandemic was Animal Crossing. And
Exactly.
I remember the original Animal. I didn't play the new one, but the original Animal Crossing had fossils. So with that, they were all for the most part dinosaur bones, and I'm not. So is that
Sure.
Is that paleo gaming?
Maybe, right? It probably is. I'm sure. I don't know if paleontologists are so obsessed with this as archaeologists are. So I don't know if they tear apart the like Jurassic Park video games and stuff like that, and references like that in Animal Crossing. I don't know if they do that as much as archaeologists do.
It's because culturally, that's the one with probably the broadest reach, other than maybe like the Star Wars games.
Yeah.
I think.
Right. But you're getting into something that kind of crosses the lines between the two sides of gaming from my perspective. Again, one of them is how are things represented, so that is like the bones and the artifacts and the storylines and the people and stuff like that. The other one is the actual archaeology of the video game. When you have a multiplayer universe or world, I'm not a huge gamer, so I probably get all the terms wrong. But when you have a world like this that is generated and people interact with it, one of the common examples is World of Warcraft, right? I don't know if that's even still going, but it's over 20 years old.
It came back at this point. So yeah, it just keeps going.
Yeah, and another one, there's two others that I'll bring up too, and I know there's probably lots and lots more that I'm not even aware of. Two others, one is No Man's Sky.
Okay, I think that's the quote unquote big one, because it was the first to come out that was supposed to be never ending, like always AI auto
procedurally generated.
Yeah,
exactly. And so we'll talk about that in a second, because Andrew Reinhardt was part of something in there too. And then the other one is Second Life. Second Life is still hanging on somehow as a thing. I was just actually interested in it the other day as we've been reading through Ready Player One and Ready Player Two and their whole virtual world, the Oasis. Or their virtual galaxy or universe, the Oasis. I'm like, what do we have that's comparable to that on, in our time frame today? One of those things truly is Second Life, because in Second Life, you don't have different worlds, but you have different islands that people own that can be of an infinite size, to be honest. I don't think there's a limit to the amount of land you can purchase in there for real money, and then the things that you can do on that land. And it'd be interesting, because when Second Life exploded, I think it was around maybe 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago. And Science Friday on NPR had Science Friday Island on Second Life. There's a full recreation of the Starship Enterprise that you can walk around on. There's archaeological sites people recreated in Second Life. And those places are actual ghost towns right now. Like, nobody's going there because the people that are still in Second Life are kind of the diehards, and you don't hear about it promoted. You don't hear about people talking about it. It was huge when it blew up for some reason, whatever. It's been around for a long time too. And then all of a sudden it gained in popularity, but then it dropped right back down again. So the archaeology of something like that would be going through, and archaeology is all about documentation, right? It's all about documentation and learning from things that happened before. What can we learn from that? What can we learn about it? You can do the same thing in those types of worlds, Second Life, World of Warcraft, and now something like No Man's Sky, and any other universe that's not automatically destroyed by the servers after a certain period of time. As long as you can see the effects of things that human or the non-player characters or whoever did on the landscape, well, you can document that. And then you have to ask the question, well, is there value to that? Probably. I know somebody who almost failed college because of World of Warcraft. It's like all he was doing. That's a really big part of his life, and it's a really big part of millions of people's lives, and it's experiences that are completely undocumented by real life. to be
yeah,
honest.
I mean,
So it's an
you
interesting
pick a
side.
game, and I'm sure somebody missed a class for it.
Sure.
That's just the nature of gaming, I think, to a certain extent. But
Yeah.
I hear you, because it, you know, I go back through old games occasionally. I probably have a decent Archeo gaming collection because I hold on to one old computer just so I can play old games from my youth of the early and mid 90s. Because it's
Nice.
not easy. And that's the other part. As technology moves, we evolve away from these things. So I might have a disc from 1988. I can't,
Yeah.
even if it's a CD, I can't just throw it in my current computer and play it. And even if I could, there's a lot of computers that don't even have optical disk drives. So
Yeah.
It's almost self-destructing, because as technology evolves and as programming languages change, physical disks aren't really a thing anymore. So, okay, you might hold on to that disk. What are you going to do with it now?
Yeah.
Like, good luck. Good luck finding a floppy drive. Like, even 3.5. Good luck. Like, I have one.
Yeah.
And I'll lend it to you, like, if you really want it. But like, so I understand that. I'm just slightly fat. I'm maybe I pick up Reinhardt's book. He comes up a lot. Because as like a guy on the periphery who's like, that's slightly interesting. Like, he's one of the main focuses. But I wanted to kind of circle back to you, because I do, we talked a little bit about Indiana Jones. When people find out that you have a pilot's license, do they go, so you are Indiana Jones? Like, do they double down when they find out that, like, because I imagine if I met you at a party and you're like, well, I'm an archaeologist. In layman's terms, I'm an archaeologist. All right, that's cool, And maybe I won't go Indiana Jones for a moment. But then as we continue talking and you say, well, I have a pilot's license, immediately map red dots across it. Immediately.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, because when I was probably, super young, 10, whatever, the first Indiana Jones movie, I think that came out in the mid 80s, and probably sometime around then, who knows, because I was also alive, or not alive, but I was alive, but I was also around and aware when the Challenger disaster happened right about the same time. And for as long as I can remember, I wanted to be one of three things. I wanted to be an archaeologist, a pilot, or an astronaut. And I always tell people 2 out of 3 is not bad. And I'm not 100% certain Elon Musk isn't going to call at some point. So maybe we can hit the trifecta. But you're right. When you tell somebody you're an archaeologist, it's an instant conversation starter. And then if it ever comes up that I'm a pilot too, it's like, what the hell's going on with your life that these two things happened? So,
I mean, I immediately go, and maybe it's because I just, read the book not too long ago, but I read Dr. Space Junk's book on space archaeology.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, if you go that route, like, if you could hit the trifecta. Like, you don't even need Elon Musk for that. At a certain point, people are going to be like, well, we need to take a look at the junk that's up there. And, if we are going to eventually go back to the moon, technically all of those, what's remaining of the lunar lander bases are they're old now. They're all 50 years old. They're all archaeological sites.
And even if they weren't 50 years old, one of the other criteria for making something significant, at least in the U.S. terms of significance, is its importance to history. So pretty much anything on another planet already reaches that criteria, right? Even if that planet, on the moon, Mars, whatever the case may be, because of its uniqueness and its rarity, and every single one of these things that goes up still today is 100% different from the thing that went up before that, right? Until until SpaceX really nails down the replicability of, space vehicles and stuff like that, and now we've got 100 of those things on the planet, then they become common, right? And then they're not as unique and not as archaeologically or historically significant. So, but people have mapped the moon landing sites, and if we're ever ready to go up there, they're trying to get laws put into place for space tourism in particular, because the first space tourists that are able to land on the moon are going to want to see the moon landing site, the first moon landing site, right? So we're like, how do you protect against that without the ability to send up a bunch of park rangers first in spacesuits, right? You just can't do that. So you got to have some kind of legal structure in place for when they get back that says, hey, we saw you up there because we have telescopes and your footprints are right next to Neil Armstrong's, and that's bad. So we want to put this buffer around it, because that's the other thing, the difference between the moon and Mars. One of the bigger differences is the moon doesn't really have an atmosphere. So most of the stuff is just still laying where it was, and it's the only way it gets covered in other stuff is if, some other impact happens near it and material, gets ejected out and then lands on the thing. So if other landers are landing close enough to it, it could actually move or obscure some of the stuff on the site. Whereas right now, aside from other space impacts, it's preserved as the day when they left, and the footprints are there, everything's there. But Mars is better for archaeologists because, things that are currently moving around on the planet are getting covered in dust. They're just getting consumed by the landscape on a daily basis if they don't keep moving. And I think there was one that they were trying to get restarted, and they were hoping that there were just a dust storm that lasted for too long in its area, and it covered the solar panels, and they were hoping the wind would blow the dust back off the solar panels at some point so they could fire the engines back up. But it didn't. So it's dead forever.
So are you telling me that
like,
archaeologists would prefer a challenge like Mars or Earth, I guess? Like, let's not forget what we've got here, where things are constantly in flux and changing, versus the moon, where it's like, all right, well, that's the footprint. Like, there it is.
Yeah. I know. There's not a whole lot you can do about that, right? You can get up there, you could catalog stuff, but how do you do it without disturbing the other things? You'd have to build some sort of gantry that you could kind of float around in that lower gravity environment, so you don't actually touch anything. Because in a place where things like footprints last for 60 years, or really 1,000 years or longer, a million years, you can't disturb those. You can't add your own. So how do you actually record it? It would have to be from a distance. And then the question goes, well, we should just really preserve it. Do we actually need to write all this down? I'm a little bit minimalist when it comes to archaeology, right? I'm all for, I shouldn't say this on a recording, but I'm all for tearing buildings down. Write about it, 3D scan it, then tear it the hell down. We do not need to preserve everything from our own childhoods in order to remember it, in order to memorialize it. We need to tear them down and move on. All those sci-fi movies where you see the whole planet that's an advanced city, it's literally never going to happen on this planet, because we're going to be holding on to our mid-century modern crap hotels that we refuse to tear down, because I remember that when I was a kid. Get out of here.
No, I look, you're not wrong. I grew up in a small town, and I drove through it a few years ago. Maybe the stores have changed, but the buildings are, if I fell asleep here and woke up there in 20 years, I still expect that, okay, I won't recognize the names of the stores, but I'll recognize the town. Like, it's just, okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed one iota. And the sad part is, growing up there 20, 30 years ago from as we speak now, I got to look at pictures from 50 years prior. Same buildings, different store, same building. Like, none of that stuff has changed. And, hey, look, we don't know what is at the bottom of the Jetsons world, which was the future we were all promised, right? So maybe below the clouds, it is nothing but mid-century hotels that nobody wanted to tear down.
They had to move into space.
There was nowhere else to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting too. I was we spent the last until we moved into an RV back in June. We spent the last 10, 11 years in Reno, Nevada. Now, neither my wife or I are from there, but we spent a significant amount of time there. And at some point, I did join a group. I was asked to join it. There was a physical group there that was meeting all about basically preserving the mid-century modern hotels in Reno, which is why I use that as a specific example, because Reno really exploded during that time period in history, right? Before that, it was still kind of a dusty cow town. And at some point after Vegas exploded, kind of around the same time, Reno really blew up with all that too. And all these hotels and the road between, going south and then coming over from the mountains from Sacramento and San Francisco, a lot of travelers coming through, those hotels just blew up. And they are iconic hotels. I mean, that whole look with the angular signs and the neon and just the mid-century modern look, it is super cool. Don't get me wrong. But you can't repurpose every single one of them, right? You can't repurpose all of them. And I kept thinking, I was kind of just joined this group. They met on a couple Sundays and then they kind of fizzled out. But everybody was talking about how we need to preserve the iconic look of Reno, the Reno of the past, and we need to preserve that in some way, even if it's in new buildings that incorporate those older elements, or repurposing these old buildings as something else. There was a mid-century modern hotel in Sacramento they have all this repurposed older but refurbished furniture and things like that, and they made it a co-working space or something, or office building instead of a hotel, and that looks really cool, right? So there's those things. But I was like, which version of Reno are you choosing to preserve? Why don't you preserve the version that's 150 years ago where it's teepees next to the river? Oh, wait, we kicked out the Native Americans and we made our own version of Reno. So how about the old huts that the miners would live in, when they would come to the big city by the water? No, we don't like that one either. Okay, well, how about the 1920s and 30s when, the divorce industry was really kicking off and people were coming there to get married and divorced and these little houses were going up? Oh, we don't like that version either? I mean, which version do you choose to say this is iconic Reno of the past, And then you look at any town and you say, why are we choosing to hang on to a slice of time? Why can't we just remember, preserve, and record that slice of time, preserve digitally or, in photographs and things like that? Why do we need to physically hang on to it? It's such a weird thing us humans do.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Look,
it's weird that we physically hang on.
I've been systematically purging my house to make room. I've been unemployed for so long, it's like I need something to do, because clearly writing and podcasting is not enough for me, but I have been I like having space. I was a pack rat for a very long time. I wouldn't consider myself that now because I'm trying to get rid of things, but yeah, why do I have this book report from 7th grade? Why? And even at that point, if we want to talk about digital, I can just use a scanner and and keep it for posterity for whatever reason I would want to keep that. I don't need there's no earthly reason to keep a physical copy of it. If I'm going to keep it, that's fine, and we can argue about how crazy that is anyway. But to be I have to have the physical copy. What? Why? What?
Yeah.
What? Sure.
That was you're totally right. And I've moved a lot in my life. And prior to us, my wife and I living in Reno, she's an archaeologist too. We actually were on the road for over a year. I think it was a year and a half or so. We'd put all our stuff in storage. And when you live on the road doing archaeology, you realize, man, all that stuff I have in storage, what the hell is that for? I've been a year and a half without it so far. Why do I have it? And then you get to a house or something, and we brought all our stuff with us. You put it all in there, you get more stuff, you throw stuff away, you get more stuff. And in Reno, in the 10 years we were there, we moved, I think, 3 or 4 times for various reasons. And this very last time, when we bought the RV in June, we went out for 6 weeks just to kind of make sure that this is the kind of thing we wanted to do, because it was all a little bit hasty the way it kind of went down. And then we said, yeah, this is great. We came back and we had 3 weeks basically to empty out our townhouse that we owned, and we ended up renting that. So we've got a renter in there now, but we sold our furniture, we threw stuff away, we gave stuff away. We kept very few things. There's a handful of things that we kept just because the way that I want to get rid of those is a little bit different. It needs to be a little more selective, and I just didn't have the time. So we're going to actually do that this summer. At least I am. My wife's got some things she just couldn't get rid of, but this was the first move and the first purge where I got rid of stuff that for whatever psychological reason, was hard to get rid of. Like, I mean, I dumped yearbooks. You mentioned a book report or something like that. I had like a story that I wrote. I dumped that back when I was like 6 or whatever. I mean, I was like, why am I hanging on to this stuff? Is any of the things that I'm looking at right now, is it important just to me, or is it going to be important to someone else or humanity when I die? If the answer is no, and it's just important to me, it's going in the trash right now.
Yeah,
because I don't care.
So I've been, and I think I wrote about it. For me, it's been not like a great purge, but it's been a consistent purge, and I challenge myself to be like 5 items a day is my my minimum, right? And it's not throw 5 things away. It's either get rid of or put away 5 items. So for me, it could also be like taking a bookshelf and being like, all right, well, this book goes over here, right? That this doesn't belong here. Or like, okay, I made space on the bookshelf so that way all of my books are vertical instead of stacked every which way, stuffed into a bookshelf, right? And you get rid of a few things and you make a little bit of room, and it's easy how these things pile up. And so it's been slowly. But what's funny is I've been doing this for like 1.5 years now, and it doesn't seem like I'm ever going to stop. Like, I keep finding more stuff, and I'll admit, for better or worse, like, I've avoided that drawer. I've avoided that closet, right? Like, just that box right there, I really should go through it at some point. But I don't want to, like, but I know that by challenging myself at a certain point, I have to go through that drawer. And then you go, well, I skipped a bunch of stuff in that drawer, so I'll go back to it or whatever. Like, I understand completely. And in the process of getting rid of stuff and then just challenging myself to keep doing it to make more space. And it's not space for more stuff. It's just space to live, space to work. In doing this, I've kept my desk the cleanest it's ever been in my entire life. It's amazing what it's like to work without piles. It
nice,
is.
Isn't it?
It's fantastic. But I agree. Yeah. Like, I need to change my own mindset a bit there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Imagine where the world would be if everyone did that, right? We've got, I just traveling around the country for the past, well, almost my whole career, but specifically for the past, since June or so of 2020, you see the same thing over and over again. You see houses in rural areas that are just, there's junk everywhere outside, right? It gets to the point where you just can't clean it up. It's just too much. And then you see storage facility upon storage facility upon storage facility that is full of things that people just couldn't give away. They couldn't give it up. It's like, I'm going to actually pay every month to store this garbage that I just can't throw away. It's actual garbage and I can't put it in the trash. And that's what I'm going to do with it. And it's just, I don't know. It's phenomenal the way that works in the human psyche. And, to your point about working on a nice clean desk, I was just telling somebody today, one of the things I love about working in the RV, is one of my colleagues. She was like, my office is a complete, it's complete trash right now. I've got stuff everywhere. And I'm like, you know what? That's the nice thing about living in an RV. My office is my front right passenger seat. And it may get that way over the week or 2 weeks at most that we're in a location. But I'll tell you what, my wife's got to sit here when we start driving. So I got to clean everything up and put it all away. Yeah. Like every week or two, I'm forced to do a hard reset. Yeah. And I love it. So, yeah, it's great. The whole house is like that, too. We might let some stuff go. We might put some stuff on the counter. We might put some stuff on the dinette here. But I'll tell you what, when it's moving day, everything goes away. Because if you don't, you're in a low-level sustained earthquake for the next 7 hours driving, and everything's going to be on the floor and destroyed. So you have to put everything away. It has to go in its place, and you're forced to do that every week or two, and I love it.
Sentimentality and the ability to remember things has so little to do with physical objects that we hold on to these things on the off chance that we might one day forget why they are important to us. But on a whole, I find that can be complete and utter nonsense. As someone who has been constantly purging to reduce the clutter in my life, there are plenty of things that I have no earthly understanding of what it ever meant to me. And yet, conversely, I can fondly remember the bikes I rode that I no longer have, or the shoes that I used to run competitive cross-country or track in during high school that I also no longer have. We find ourselves trapped because physical things are supposed to mean something. But the more I go through things, and the more conversations I have like the one you just heard, the more I'm thankful for the memories. Look, I'm not Marie Kondo. And I'm not Chris Webster either, though it seems like the RV life suits not only him but his lifestyle. But I am a proponent of less clutter. Perhaps it is because I have too much time on my hands. But it could also be that some years back, I remember losing my last two grandparents, my mother's mom and my dad's dad, and those deaths were within a year or two of each other, and going through what had remained from their lives, especially without the benefit of them being there to identify the value, even if they happened to remember, if there was any, stuck with me. And I know my parents were similarly affected because they too have been downsizing, not for any other reason other than to declutter. Again, I'm not saying to throw everything away, but do you really need to hold on to every single thing from your past? What value does the physical thing hold? And is the memory tarnished because you can't hold that thing in your hand anymore? Think about that. That's all I'm saying. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 45. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Chris Webster at ArchaeoWebby, that's ArcheoWebby, DIGTECH at DIGTECH LLC, the Archaeology Podcast Network at ArchPodNet, and this show at the Palmer Files. You can get all of Chris's particulars at digtech-llc.com or propodcastnow.com or archpodnet.com, all of which will continue to lead you to Chris or Chris adjacent things. My writings and rantings can be found on agentpalmer.com, and email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. All right, Chris, do you have one final question for me?
Yes, I do. So, if you lived in the world or universe of Ready Player One, and you were spending all of your time in the Oasis, what would be the planet you spent the most time on? And it could be a planet that either you read about in the books, or obviously you can make up whatever you want. What fictional, digital, crazy planet would you live on in the Oasis?
So, I feel like there's a few options for me, because obviously in the Oasis, like, you get to feel everything, but you're safe, right? Like, that's right. The appeal of the Oasis in the Ready Player One world to me is like, I could live in the Shire without the fear of the Dark Lord. Like, that's the appeal.
Yeah.
Or you can go to Endor and not have to worry about the Empire.
Right.
So I feel like it would probably be one of those. I'd probably spend a lot of time in like that, like Hobbiton type, or like Endor, like up in the trees, like probably nature. Like, I'm not a real nature guy. But in a digital realm, there would be no reason not to. I feel like, maybe my brain's overthinking it, because immediately I go like, well, it's it's like the fake nature. So, and there are different variations of each of them. Like if I remember correctly from the book, there were like different variations of different things. So like there would be, you know, Star Wars has multiple canons at this point. Arguably or not, that's the way it is. And there would be like a world or a universe for each canon where, you know, this is true in this one and this is not true in another. And I just feel like that would be, I would just go to the place where it'd be like, it's just pretty and I don't have to worry about bugs. Or, you know, it's, you know what I mean? Like, just that would be the place. And I feel like it would probably be like a Hobbiton type scenario because that feels the most peaceful to me. Now, I wouldn't stay there. Like, I would have an issue just being there permanently. There's a part, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's a part in, I think, Ready Player 2. I think it's Ready Player 2, where they go to the Prince world.
Yeah.
Which is all... So I feel like I would spend a lot of time just going to, like, different artists' worlds. Like, go to Aerosmith world, go to Rolling Stones world, like, go back to, like, you know, Little Richard world. Like, I feel like I could do that where it'd be, like, just walk down the street and, like, different albums on each street or however they set it up. Yeah. I think... I'm not a big travel guy, but in a digital sense, I would be all over travel in the Oasis, I think that's...
Nice.
That's... I mean, what... Do you have one?
Well, I think I would, much like our discussion of games earlier, one of the big reasons I'm not a big gamer is because I would go all in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I would just lose myself in whatever the thing was. And in that world, I mean, we're reading the books, and it seems like, you know, especially in the second book, I mean, let's just assume you've seen them, at least seen the movie at this point, and you know they win the whole thing and become billionaires. But in the second book, they don't have to work per se because, you know, they could spend all their time in the Oasis. And I feel like I'm trying to be realistic with it. Like, where would I want to go? But realistically, if I had to not work ever and I could just be there all the time, I think I would want to spend years really living in a certain way. Like you mentioned the Hobbit world. Sure, absolutely. I would love to live like that, but also like Star Trek. Like I would love to just be a bridge officer, not even like the captain, but I would like to just be like a bridge officer on a Star Trek ship, not even really the Enterprise maybe, but in like the Star Trek sector and just living that life for a little while and going through and having evaluations, you know, and just like being a person in that world and living that way. But that goes back to the obsession, you know. I like doing that kind of stuff. I keep telling my wife, if we ever get to the point where we can do this, I can already work digitally, but time zones are an issue because all my clients are in, you know, North America, but I want to put the RV in storage for a year, and I want to go to Europe and Eastern Europe and, you know, like Scandinavia, and spend like a month or two in an Airbnb at a time, you know, because I don't want to spend a weekend. I don't want to spend a week. I want to go there and spend a month, 2 months, you know, live in the city, live in the town, do something, and then move to a different one and experience things like that. And I think I would treat something like the Oasis exactly the same way if I had the ability to.
Yeah, I agree, man. It'd be great.
Yeah, it'd be fun. I hesitate with some of the stuff though, like the Prince Planet and some of the other ones. They are created by people who may or may not have been alive during the actual time of that person, which is not a pre-qualification, but they are computer generated, which means people generated.
Yeah.
And unless we got to the point where we could just feed an AI a whole bunch of data and it created what it thought the world would look like, that would be interesting. But in the end, the quests and the things, they're all still just created by people. And
well, I think part of it, but you know, I look at it like this. I've been listening to the Scrubs Rewatch podcast and watching that show and watching along with them, I should say. And the difference in detail that like they might remember for the set, or that's in the wiki, or that's wrong in the wiki, the amount of detail that we have and what we hold. I mean, it goes back to like what we hold on to.
Right.
the details that we remember or that are important to us, we don't know why.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So I feel like, I don't know if an AI can really do it. You can be a fan. I think a fan would be, or a fan. I don't know. You need a level. There's a level. There's a quality assurance that needs to go on, for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Indeed.